I have a story to tell about a World War II B-17 waist gunner. Like many students of World War II history, I am caught up in the lore of the B-17 bomber. My interest started because my dad was a B-17 pilot in the Air Transport Command. He then flew 66 missions over the Himalayan hump in B-24 derivatives. My books about him got Dad inducted into the Kansas Governor's Aviation Hall of Fame 25 years after he passed. When I was a young lad, my mother took me to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington. Then I had only a vague notion that my father had flown the B-17 in World War II, yet I was enthralled by this giant mural there. The B-17's role in the war made it an iconic symbol of burgeoning American power in the world and the promise of triumph over the Axis forces. My mother said the B-17 was the most beautiful man-made object she'd ever seen. Maybe that revealed a charming romantic notion in the heart of a young woman toward one of the airplane's pilots of her acquaintance. This is the cover art from Broomfield, Colorado author Adam Makos's book, A Higher Call. It's one of the finest books on World War II aviation I've ever read. Adam spoke at the Veterans Museum World War II Symposium in 2022 at the Broomfield Auditorium. The story of this Luftwaffe pilot escorting this crippled B-17 to safety over the Channel, despite knowing he would be executed if found out by Nazi command, well, it'll make you shed a tear. The two pilots became close friends after the war. The B-17's ability to absorb intensive damage in combat, keep flying, and bring its crew home was legendary. The magnitude of human sacrifice and ultimate victory that it brought to the war made this one of the most romanticized airplanes in history. Few other aircraft types can be associated with so much human drama. I do a presentation with author-collaborator Mike Martin, no relation that we know about, entitled April Girl, a biography of a World War II B-17 and Colorado heroes who served on B-17s. In the past 2 years, I've interviewed 5 100-plus-year-old World War II veterans, including several B-17 crewmen. In the April Girl story, they are Dad, a B-17 pilot, Mike Klein, a B-17 tail gunner who was a friend of the Veterans Museum. His talk is at the museum YouTube channel. Mike advised me on my book. Liesel, a Broomfield resident, she gives the perspective from the ground. Her father was killed during a B-17 raid, rushing her to a bomb shelter. Bill Roche, a much-loved volunteer at the National Museum of World War II Aviation, he was a B-17 waist gunner. Author Mike's dad, Harold Martin, B-17 engineer and top turret gunner, didn't meet with him but worked with his son. And the star of today's presentation, Elmer Lucky McGinty B-17 waist gunner. You can see the 50-minute April Girl presentation at the YouTube channel of the National Museum of World War II Aviation or at my own YouTube channel. I found out about Lucky from these news articles, and I called his daughter Diane to let me meet him. I wanted to add Lucky to my cast of heroes. There was a lot in the news about his 100th birthday, so right after, I got to meet Lucky. Now, Diane says this photo does not capture his quick wit and charming demeanor, yet you can see that my own bubbly personality shines right through in this photo. We planned an event for him in Longmont. Congressman Negus and the mayor of Longmont had planned to join us. Then, Lucky passed away a week earlier. It took us a couple months to reschedule at the Broomfield Grange. Lucky's family was in from all over the U.S. for his ceremony at Fort Logan. It was quite an honor to give this presentation for them. In telling Lucky's story, in tribute to him, I want to look at service in B-17s. What was it like? What did they do on a day-to-day basis? I try to give a visceral sense of what Lucky and thousands of others experienced in missions over Europe in 8th Air Force B-17 bombers. These men, just boys at the time, Lucky enlisted at age 17, even before Pearl Harbor, they endured a lifetime of challenge and trauma in just that 1 year or so of deployment. Most were barely emerged from adolescence. Many would never return. My dad ferried factory-fresh B-17s from Salina, Kansas to Europe. I have to ponder whether he flew any of the airplanes that Lucky and others in the April Girl story served in. It is quite possible. Against regulations, Dad took crews home to my parents' Wilmington, Delaware apartment where Mother would prepare the last home-cooked meal many would ever have. By this point in the war, of the men and women Dad had for dinner in their small apartment, it is probable that 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 were killed in their B-17s. Dad told of his dismay at having to teach aircraft fundamentals to these crews headed to combat over Europe. He said they didn't even know how to use the throat mics. Microphones in the B-17 were worn around the neck and worked through throat vibrations to keep the mouth open for talking or shouting in the cabin and to allow the wearing of an oxygen mask. Many of these young crewmen tried to hold the microphone by hand and talk directly into it. In the rush to war, training of the massed numbers of new airmen was less than comprehensive. These young men had already run a frightful gauntlet to get this far. The Army Air Forces lost over 15,000 aircrew in training accidents alone in World War II, compared to 26,000 bomber combat losses over Europe. Now, here's a picture of gunners in training and then what they did in actual combat. It's quite a big difference. The guy in training standing on a soapbox is using a smaller field weapon. The worst threat to his life is that training sergeant. But over Europe at 20,000 feet and 30 degrees below zero, the 50 caliber machine gun in the B-17 could fire 800 rounds per minute, but it would jam from the heat if you fired for more than 50 seconds. Notice how this waist gunner is standing ankle deep in spent shells. Now, to lend some understanding of the immense unified national effort that went into B-17 operations, let's take a 1.5-minute visit to the Boeing Military Airplane Company B-17 factory in Seattle. Note that even the popular music of the day was totally focused on America's united war effort.
She's a part of the assembly line. She's making history, working for victory. Rosie, the riveter, keeps a sharp lookout for sabotage. Sitting up there on the fuselage, that little Fred can do more than a man can do. Rosie, the riveter. Rosie's got a boyfriend, Charlie. Charlie, he's a Marine. Rosie is protecting Charlie, working overtime on the riveting machine.
April Girl likely was born in the Seattle factory of the Boeing Military Airplane Company. B-17s rolled off assembly lines like automobiles. The Seattle plant reached a production level of up to 16 per day. Many more were built elsewhere. In all, 12,731 B-17s were built. That production level eclipsed modern aircraft manufacturing volumes. The United States produced over 300,000 aircraft in World War II of all types. Production outpaced the availability of pilots. The logistics of just delivering this many aircraft to the theaters of war challenges credulity. It took nearly 500,000 men and women to crew B-17s during World War II. In combat over Europe, nearly 26,000 Americans died in them. Lucky traveled to war aboard the Queen Elizabeth, the largest troop ship in World War II. The names of these great canard queens evoke the finest luxury on the seas, but in World War II, not so much. She carried over 15,000 Americans on each voyage, but at 28 knots, she could not outrun German U-boats. My dad returned to New York on the Queen Mary after a B-17 delivery. He took this photo of her at the Southampton docks. The Elizabeth carried over 750,000 American servicemen to Europe, likewise her sister ship Queen Mary. Because of this, history records that Hitler had one of his obsessions about sinking the Queens. He offered a $250,000 reward for any U-boat captain and crew who sank the Queen Mary. It's safe to assume the offer held for the Elizabeth. I googled the value of money equation. That's $4,350,000 in today's dollars. So who today wants to book a stateroom on QE2 for a cruise to Europe if you knew dozens of submarines were prowling your route competing for a $4.3 million prize for killing you? As soon as the new crews arrived at their English air bases, they received orientation briefings. The following account from Harold Martin is in Mike Martin's book Steel Fortress. This is typical of the briefing Lucky and all aircrew heard upon arrival. They were told, "Gentlemen, you are virtually unprepared for combat, in spite of your stateside training. Truth is, despite the readiness training you will receive here, half of you will not finish your 25-mission tour of duty. You have been told of the combat efficiency of the B-17. That is simply not true, and you have been misled. So my advice to you is to not think too much. Just take it one day at a time and do your job well. You may make it out of here alive." The men were stunned. No one saw this coming. They learned about surviving the below-zero temperatures and 170-mile-per-hour winds that ripped through open portals in the plane. Freezing was a deadly problem. Oxygen masks froze at high altitude, killing crews regularly. The low pressure at altitude caused headache, nausea, and poor coordination. Exertion caused cramping and fluid in the lungs and brain, resulting in death. They were briefed that if parachuted behind German lines, outraged citizens had started lynching American flyers or clubbing them to death. If they fought back, the Gestapo would execute them.
At 30,000 feet, the crews of the unpressurized B-17s operated in extreme conditions. Encumbered by bulky clothing, engaging an enemy fighter was no easy task.
It's 55 below zero up there, and even though we had heaters in the cockpit, the poor gunners back in the rear, they had no heat. And even though they wore heated suits, some of them, and wore a lot of clothing, it was still very cold back there, and frostbite was a problem for them.
The biggest thing, people don't realize, people sweat at 45 degrees below zero. You sit there sweating. Maybe it was fair sweat, I don't know.
It still is.
Each crewed by 10 men, thousands of them would fly the most perilous missions of the Second World War. Many would never return.
And so missions began in earnest as a relentless daily routine set in, and the men became familiar with the realities of B-17 missions. It was out of bunks by 5 a.m. or earlier, to the mess hall for eggs and bacon, then to the mission briefing. Here the boys would learn of the target for the day. Often groans would rise in the room. Not Berlin again. They had barely survived prior missions. Imagine the stress of living this way, of wondering if you would be among the possible 30%, that this is the day you would die. You fly a mission for 6 hours, 8, 10, or more in the freezing high-altitude conditions and return from the mission exhausted beyond belief.
Drive across the landing ground in a jeep, and there awaiting them are the giant 4-engine bombers which have a date with a certain factory. The occupant of the Stinger or tail gun takes his place. The penthouse turret gunner and the 2 trigger men in the waist of the fortress also make themselves at home.
Still, you must write up your mission report. Here is one of Lucky's gunnery reports. Then, after this kind of harrowing workday, you can go to the mess hall. Maybe a few beers, though Lucky didn't drink, perhaps a key to his longevity. Then you try somehow to wind down and get some sleep. Next morning, it starts all over again. Lucky lived the story portrayed in the Tom Hanks series Masters of the Air. Now, I'm a B-17 nerd, and I can notice the difference between a B-17F and a G model. This series does a meticulous job of getting the technical details correct. Lucky flew from that same Thorpe Abbotts airfield at the same time this series portrays. Here is another painting of Thorpe Abbotts that I and many have used on Christmas cards. It evokes a cold, quiet moment, Christmas 1943. I imagine the men around a wood stove, singing carols and decorating a meager tree. They were optimistic because fleets of new 17s and fresh crews were arriving, boosting the force. But for many, this would be their last Christmas. The worst was yet to come in the spring.
The
100th Bombardment Group was recently depicted in Apple TV's hit series Masters of the Air, from the executive producers of Band of Brothers and the Pacific.
The 8th will be sending up the largest air armada ever assembled in the history of mankind.
Straight into Hitler's territory.
Here in East Anglia, Station 139, as it was officially designated by the 8th Air Force, Thorpe Abbotts Airfield was one of over 40 heavy bomber bases used by the mighty 8th for their bombing raids on targets throughout Nazi-occupied Europe. Similar to other Allied bomber bases throughout England, Thorpe Abbotts covered an area of 500 acres, had 3 runways, including one of the longest in England, and up to 50 hard stands, parking places for B-17s when they weren't out flying on missions. In just under 2 years, the 100th Bomb Group flew 306 missions, including 8,630 sorties, and during that time they dropped over 19,000 tons of bombs. The unit earned the nickname the Bloody 100th due to its very high losses on 8 deadly missions. The impact the 100th Bombardment Group, and many other bomb groups like it, had on the overall effort to win the war cannot be overstated. Fully aware that their chances of survival were minimal, these air crews continued to take the fight to the enemy against all odds and faced death day after day.
In the book Steel Fortress, Harold Martin said that from the first mission, the stress of fatigue and terror were beyond anything training had prepared the crew for. By 1944, when Lucky was in theater, operations had become a war of attrition. The invincible flying fortresses they had trained on at home were now being deployed as bait for German fighters, so American fighters could pursue and follow to their bases. Command was prepared to lose 2/3 of the bombers. That's 7,000 men. Having your command sending you to the slaughter like that is part of a warrior's traumatic duty in war. In April alone, 537 bombers and 191 American fighter planes were lost. That's close to 5,500 men. The calculation was that the Germans would lose more faster. Now, history narratives and news casualty reports cavalierly toss out such simple statistics on human life, but 537 is just a number. I had the privilege of giving the April Girl presentation at the National Museum of World War II Aviation in Colorado Springs on Veterans Day. In tribute to these lost heroes, we had a couple moments of silence to look at that number graphically. That's just the B-17s lost in the month of April during Lucky's tour, plus 191 fighter aircraft. Those are the 8th Air Force losses in men and airplanes in just April 1944. Rookies were advised to get lucky. If you're hit, get out quick. You only have 30 seconds. And here's a little clue on how to fight this war. Pretend you're dead already. The rest comes easy. And the much-touted precision bombing capabilities, the claim that the Norden bomb sight could drop a bomb in a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet, that was becoming a crapshoot. Targets had to be hit multiple times to inflict significant damage. With fighter escorts pursuing enemy fighters, the B-17s became target practice for the enemy. And precision bombing tactics against military targets gave way to area bombing. That was a euphemistic term for non-precision targeting of civilian populations such as Dresden. Now that raises a sensitive issue for historians about what our veterans are asked to bear in their hearts and souls. In addition to the daily trauma of self-survival, these men knew what was happening 20,000 feet below. I once had the very great privilege of meeting Paul Tibbets. Shaking his hand, he signed his book for me. He was the pilot of the most famous and perhaps important aerial bombing mission in all of human history. He reflects poignantly that his mission killed thousands of civilians, yet by all calculations, it saved up to 1 million American lives that would have been lost in an invasion of Japan. That's a moral calculation that all of us who enjoy life in this free democracy are responsible for, whether we do the fighting or not. So on top of the risk of combat itself, this is an enormous burden that we ask our combat veterans to bear in their service to our nation. To that point, one of the main protagonists in my April Girl presentation is Liesel. She was my business client in the 1990s in Broomfield. In her childhood in Germany, she had been a Hitler Youth. By the late 30s, this was mandatory for Aryan children, one of history's most frightening mass indoctrination programs, conforming the collective consciousness of literally millions of children to the bigoted hate of one man. A study of the Hitler Youth and other Nazi social engineering programs is key to explaining the Holocaust. Liesel had once presented flowers and a box of candy to Hermann Göring, who was, somewhat ironically, the commander of the Luftwaffe defending German skies against the B-17s. She would cringe and shake as she described to me the B-17 raids of her childhood, of hearing this fearsome sound slowly build in the air long before the bombers appeared from over the horizon, signaling her family to flee for the shelters. She told of how the bombers approached in massed formations, dimming the sun, filling the sky, just before releasing their terrible destruction upon her world. Her father was killed, rushing her to the shelters. When I knew her, Liesel had some real emotional scars, and yet she had become fully American, along with many former World War II Germans and Japanese. A common experience for all crews was listening to radio stations in range over enemy territory that would play American hits to get the crews to listen. Flying over the hump, my father listened to Japanese broadcasts that featured Tokyo Rose. Harold Martin told of starting a mission after crossing the channel. They passed 10,000 feet, donned oxygen, and settled in for a long flight at 30 degrees below zero. They were listening to Jean Krupa on a German radio station when a sultry female voice came on. "Hello, you B-17 boys. Are there any of you left? We haven't forgotten about you Luftgangster baby killers. We know you're coming to our beloved homeland today. See you soon. Enjoy the next song. It will be your last." Now here is the list of Lucky's 29 missions. Of special note is this period of February 20 to 25. The Army Air Corps and RAF conducted an all-out campaign against Germany's aviation industry and the Luftwaffe. Heavy bombers from the 8th and 15th Air Forces hammered aircraft engine and ball bearing plants by day, and RAF bombers attacked by night. Codenamed Operation Argument, it became known as the Big Week. The operation flew nearly 4,000 heavy bomber sorties and dropped more than 20 million pounds of bombs on industrial and military targets during Big Week. The Army Air Corps lost more than 200 heavy bombers with about 2,600 casualties. But Big Week operations cost the Luftwaffe a third of its available fighter aircraft, and a fifth of the Luftwaffe's irreplaceable veteran fighter pilots were killed. Lucky's mission to Regensburg is especially notable in history. The aircraft plants there had been under heavy bombardment since the famous high-loss raids of 1943, and this target was heavily defended. Flak was intense. Lucky may not have talked about it much in subsequent years, but history documents what he saw firsthand on these missions. This is German gun camera footage from that mission. Lucky's waist gun position had the widest view out the aircraft of this battlefield in the sky. Gunners would try to stay focused on incoming enemy fighters while craning to see if parachutes were appearing from the falling B-17s around them.
Fighters, 6 ME-109 at 3 o'clock. Keep after him, would you?
I see him. I'm on him. Come on, you. There's 4 of them. 1 o'clock high.
They're coming around. Watch. Two fighters, 6 o'clock up, coming in. Diving out, Chief.
B-17 in trouble out at 2 o'clock, watching.
Got an engine on fire. There's 2 more diving through the 94th.
3 planes, 9 o'clock, coming around. Keep your eye on them, boys.
I see him.
At 2 o'clock. Watch them, Scotty.
I got my sights on him.
Check that B-17, Chuck, 3 o'clock. Motor smoking. Fighters, 10 o'clock.
Watch those 2 at 12, Ben. They're coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on them.
They're breaking 11, breaking 11.
I got him. Watch that fighter coming in at 3 o'clock.
He's coming in a half roll. Pour up, Chief, pour up.
B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock. Keep your eye on him, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan? Come on, you guys, get out of that plane. Bail out.
There's one. He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighter.
On March 6, Lucky shot down a Messerschmitt 109 over Berlin. You might say he dropped it right on Hitler's head. American bombers were hitting the headquarters of the German Reich for the first time. Hitler knew he was in the bullseye. The best of the Luftwaffe pilots were stationed there. Lucky's ship that day was Our Gal Sal, and was the last survivor that day in the flight group. She was alone in the sky when 2 Me-109s attacked to take her down. A Facebook post of the 100th Bomb Group mentions Lucky. It says, Lucky McGinty 336 waist gunner downed a German fighter, which targeted our ship. Lucky told of watching helplessly as so very many of the guys from the 100th were being shot down over Berlin on March 6, 1944. But as one of your guys was trying to catch up with us, I was finally able to help him. The memory was so clear it was as if it had happened yesterday. I asked Lucky which mission impacted him the most or worst. It was Augsburg, March 16th in I Do'd It. The nose of the airplane was shot off. Oxygen supplies were cut off. It was 50 to 60 degrees below zero. The bombardier in that position survived, but only after his crewmates rescued him, badly injured from the 200-mile-per-hour wind blast. The aircraft was repaired and returned to service, renamed Berlin Bessie. But on October 8, Bessie was hit by flak. The pilot gave the bailout order. The crew left. Then the pilot and co-pilot regained control and returned to base, leaving 7 POWs with the enemy. Lucky flew 5 missions during that terrible month of April 1944 that we mentioned a few moments ago with the graphic moments of silence. And as a complete side note, on April 10th, Lucky was on a mission to Reims, home of some of the world's finest champagne, and where my dad got my brother a job 24 years later working in a Cessna airplane factory. Now, one more run-through of this mission list to show how lucky actually was. On this December 31 mission, he flew on Heavenly Days to Paris. 11 days later, she was shot down, killing 9 POWs. His next mission, January 4th, was on Cuddlecat to this German target. The next day, that B-17 was shot down with 1 killed, 7 POWs. The next mission on January 24 was in a B-17 that was shot down March 6. On the same mission, Lucky shot down the Messerschmitt, saving his own airplane. 1 killed, 9 POWs. The very next trip to Frankfurt, January 29, that bomber later crash-landed during that March 6 mission, 10 POWs. His aircraft on the February 3rd mission also went down on March 6, 1 dead, 9 POWs. His B-17 on the February 6th mission went down March 16th. 10 POWs bailed out. Lucky received the Air Medal February 8th. The B-17 he was on February 21 to Brunswick was shot down also on March 6, 1 killed, 9 POWs. After his Regensburg mission, that aircraft was shot down April 11th. Pilot killed, 9 POWs bailed out. February 29, Lucky received his first oak leaf cluster. The B-17 he flew on this March 6 flight to Berlin, same day that 3 of his previous airplanes were lost, and this is where Lucky shot down that Me-109. This plane was then lost 10 days later, 10 POWs. Is this account starting to get tedious? Well, we're just getting started. On March 16, Lucky was on I Dudet to Augsburg, where the nose was blown off. That's the airplane that was repaired and renamed Berlin Bessie, but on a later mission was hit by flak with the crew bailing out. Lucky was awarded his second oak leaf cluster. On March 22, the mission to Berlin was aboard Liberty ship. That was an oddly prophetic name because she was later ditched in the sea, killing 2, 8 got back alive. Third oak leaf cluster for Lucky. His aircraft on the April 1st mission crashed just 10 days later with 2 engines on fire, killing 7, 3 POWs. The B-17 Lucky flew on April 27 to the town of Haag, lasted only another 16 days when it exploded. 8 killed, 2 POWs. Lucky gets his 4th and 5th oak leaf cluster. His final mission to Berlin, May 8th, was aboard Knockout Baby. That airplane survived. Lucky was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross the next day. Lucky also received the Legion of Honor from the nation of France. This is the highest honor awarded by France. It actually bestows knighthood on the recipient, so Lucky is a knight of France. And he received this remarkable letter from Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan. You are forever one of the nation's beloved heroes. I assume they mean the British nation. Operation Overlord came 27 days after Lucky's last mission, the largest military invasion in world history. As I studied his last several mission targets, it seems obvious that Lucky was involved in the preparations. April 10, Reims. April 20, Cherbourg. April 22nd, Saint-Honoré. April 27th, Hague. May 1st, Sagré-Ménard. These targets were rail lines, bridges, and marshalling yards on supply lines to northern France from Germany. In working on history and biographies of my parents and other heroes in World War II, it's really fun and rewarding to discover their larger roles on the stage of world history that they themselves were not fully aware of at the time. It has been said that the planning for the Normandy invasion was top secret. Aside from Eisenhower's and Montgomery's staff, Bletchley Park, 10 Downing Street, the White House, nobody knew about it. Well, except the Germans and a few million other people. Lucky remained in service after his missions were completed, becoming a gunnery instructor. The war was far from over. No one could rest on their laurels. Around the world that summer of '44, news was disheartening, the eventual fate of the free world uncertain. There would be another year before Germany was defeated. The Japanese were still advancing in China. The Marines and Army still faced the brutal island-hopping march across the Pacific to an eventual invasion of Japan that would certainly cost hundreds of thousands of lives. My own dad was flying daily 10-hour missions over the Himalayas, delivering gasoline to China. The Manhattan Project was advancing, but in a very close race with German scientists who were thought to be in the lead to give Hitler the atomic bomb. And on the domestic front, bombing of the American homeland seemed imminent. Everyone's daily life was impacted by rationing and tremendous uncertainty. For warriors like Lucky and everyone back home, there was no time for rest, and the hope for victory was still in the unknowable, indefinite future. What lessons come from this history? Are we doing more in these studies than just indulging in reminiscence and nostalgia? I sometimes think part of my soul resides in the World War II era. I tend to tear up and sniffle whenever I hear Churchill's finest hour speech. From the study of that time, I believe that World War II was one of the pinnacles of American civilization because our nation and our allies were so united in common cause. We were in such close agreement on principles of honor, integrity, and duty. And because of that, America saved the world. Thousands of men and women, like Lucky and my own dad, saved the world from a global fascist threat in under 5 years. It wasn't easy. I've tried to give us a feel for the desperate, traumatic, day-to-day struggle and valor that was required on the part of hundreds of thousands of Americans and allies. McGinty's story exemplifies that it took every last ounce of unified courage to win World War II. It was this national unity that characterized the World War II era and made victory possible. That is the lesson to take from then to inform our own time now. When you study these heroes of World War II, you see adolescent kids who had to quickly become wise adults because it fell to them to save the world.